many of you wrote to me on a number of different social media platforms talking about Jamie Foxx's Pixar film Soul. And, many asked my thoughts on it in the midst of all of the different reviews that were going on. All right, and there's been quite a few. I've watched it several times. Of course, the first time with my son, and then subsequently afterwards in reflection on a number of different critiques. And there have been a lot of them. And a lot of them have merit. There were critiques about how black characters spend the majority of the film as animals, whether you're talking about Soul or whether you're talking about The Princess and the Frog, that kind of thing. There were critiques about how we haven't seen, outside of Black Panther, whose character is supposed to be retired after the death of Boseman. Hopefully they'll reconsider that one, but that seems to be the talk last I heard. But outside of Black Panther, we haven't really seen any black royalty. Even The Princess and the Frog didn't cast the black woman protagonist in the film as a royalty. So there are those questions. Both films, neither of in neither one of them did you see them in a relationship or in a marriage or any kind of intimate linkage with another black person, right? So Princess and the Frog, it was I think they made up a country and then they hired a Brazilian actor to play the love interest. In Soul, there was no love interest, which is interesting because I don't really see too many of these kind of films where that's not a factor at some point. But nevertheless, the character in the film played by Jamie Foxx, Joe Gardner, had no love interest at all. The only relationships he really had with women, particularly black women, was like his mother and the band leader of the band he was trying to get in. So, an interesting kind of dynamic. Other critiques that I've heard had to do with, the white woman character who actually inhabits his body, and spoilers, whatever. Critiques about the white woman inhabiting his body for a good portion of the film, which, takes something away from his own agency. And like I said, I think many of the critiques of the film have merit, right? For a number of reasons, right? Joe Gardner ends up in a cat for a good portion of the film, right? And I know, critique, tearing things down is definitely more exciting. So I'm in full agreement with many of the critiques that I've seen. I don't know how to pronounce your name, Dayutit or Amin Ra. I'll just go with that part of it. I don't want to keep mispronouncing the first part of your name. Yeah, Coming to America, you do see royalty, but I was talking more in a Disney Pixar sense. So I apologize for not clarifying that. Because usually Disney films, you're seeing princesses and queens and all these kind of royalty characters. But when you start to see black characters who finally get a chance to be in those films, they're nowhere near any of that. And there are plenty of historical periods that could be referenced for that, but they are conveniently not. But anyway, so like I was saying, tearing down the films is popular. It's easier. It's fun. And I actually think many of the critiques had merit. I do. I agree with them on a number of fronts. But there were other elements that I didn't really hear talked about as much. Some people acknowledged the animation, the barbershop scene. And so there was a little bit of talk about that. But for me, I actually had a colleague at my university who, teaches on graphic arts, computer design, and this was a number of years ago. She was telling me how Pixar actually couldn't figure out how to do black hair in terms of the animation, which I didn't understand because I'm like, well, if you guys can do, you can literally see individual strands of hair in their characters, especially when she was doing a lecture on The Incredibles. And I'm noticing as a former artist myself, how exact, many of the designs were. And yet when it came to black people, they had difficulty with it. And she talked about, how long it took for them to be able to get black hair. So the animation in this film, as far as representing, black folk, looked very good. Actually looked very good. I actually haven't heard anybody say anything negative about the animation. The animation was ridiculously good. And The elements of African American culture I like. So here's the thing. The film itself, for me, is one thing. But I honor the particular folk who had a lot to do with making sure the elements of African American culture were represented. And if you watch the details, or not the details, what do they call it? Like the extras. Right? If you see the film on Disney Plus and you go to the extras, they made a lot of like making of videos, and you can see some of the various African American folk they brought forward to really lend and establish a kind of central humanity, black humanity, to not just Joe Gardner the character, but even to the area of Queens that he lives in. But the particular thing that I was drawn to was the jazz and the artists that they brought into play and the music they played, and and how it struck me, in terms of how precise it was. So there were a couple of things that stood out for me, that I just wanted to call some attention to. Right, I loved seeing an adult black male demonstrate mastery at something in a film. Because again, I'm sitting with my son. We can count on one hand how many of these films that he's seen since childhood that showed him anything reminiscent of him. Now, do I think these films are somehow going to create his humanity? Or no, I'm not tripping on that. That's my job, to work with him on developing that. However, it does make it easier when we can sit down and enjoy something media-based that affirms humanity, black male humanity at that, in some way, shape, or form. And so in that respect, I liked certain elements of it. I liked the demonstration of mastery, even very early on in the film, when you see the character playing piano and playing it brilliantly. I mean, there were several moments when he would play, and everybody in the room would pause in awe of what he was doing. I loved seeing those kind of elements. The music itself, like I said, was brilliantly done. One of the things I noticed when the white woman character was inhabiting his body, she, of course, and they played it for humor, but she was very whimsical and joyous. She was this, kind of spirit being that had never actually lived before, and so she was experiencing life through his body. But what I actually saw, which was interesting to me, was a black male character who, of course, inhabited by this white woman, so that's how you can see the highlight of it. But he wasn't encumbered by the reality of black male life, right? He's skipping down the street, he's, expressing, laughing, people are staring at him, and appropriately so. But when I saw it, I was looking at it like, wow. It kind of made me think of how I carry myself in public spaces. Basically, the way I carry myself, even while on a cane, right? I carry myself like a fighter's going to jump off at any minute. I carry myself like if I hear a gunshot, I immediately am assessing where to go to find cover. And I'm not military trained, I'm not police trained, but my thought process is always, when I step into a room, where do I go if some shit jumps off? What do I do with my son? Who am I with? What degree of protection do I owe somebody I'm with? If it's somebody I just walked in the door with, okay, none, not necessarily. But if it's my son, am I prepared for that? My thought process is always around navigating life-death situations. There's never a time when I leave my house where I'm not contemplating, am I coming back? What do I need to put into place if I don't? You know what I mean? So watching these moments where, even though it's not him and his body, but this dispirited, white represented being, it really highlighted for me the degree to which my humanity is fraught with staying aware of what can happen to me at every damn moment. And that was one of the things that it highlighted to me. And even though they didn't play the character Joe Gardner as serious as many of the brothers I know, the way he carried himself suggested to me that he wasn't oblivious to that reality either. But nonetheless, that was interesting to me. Let me see. I liked, there was, one of the big critiques is that his character gives his life again to this white woman character after finally achieving his dream, and it doesn't really feel the way he thought it would. And there's a moment where, in that, he, how do I put it? Before he gives his life tour, and I forgot about this watching it the first time. He reflects on his own life, and he finds value and meaning in his own life, because this is a character who's so obsessed with jazz that he's kind of disconnected from life, and he doesn't realize how disconnected he is until much later. And when he starts to figure out how disconnected he is from life and even the people around him, he starts to explore his humanity beyond just his love for jazz. So there's a moment where he reflects on his life before giving it up, and he finds meaning beyond, again, his obsession with jazz. And what I found mind-blowing when I rewatched it is the majority of the scenes they show where he reflected on his life's value were scenes with him and his father. And I had never processed that. When I rewatched it, I was like, wow. Most of the scenes in his flashback, there was one scene with a woman, but he was standing on a beach and you only saw her silhouette. Now, there's a long legacy of Hollywood of, not only emasculating black men, but, really, kind of making us void of gender in a particular way in some instances. So you have the hypersexual trope with the Mandingo stereotype. And then if you look at the Uncle Tom stereotype, one of the aspects of the Uncle Tom was that he lacked sexual drive, sexual agency, if you will. Those are two very different tracks that we can find black male characters represented on. But when it came to this, even though they didn't really play up relationships with women, what I found fascinating was they actually highlighted the depth of his relationship with his father, who had passed on before the movie started, and that's what he used to define his own sense of value in life. So I found that interesting. So that being said, I just wanted to kind of say, again, I agree with the critiques, not pushing back against them. You can find things that you like elements of and disagree with other elements of at the same time, and we don't often do that on the internet or in social media in terms of nuance. It's either all horrible or it's the greatest thing ever. I'm not looking for Pixar or Disney necessarily to define black humanity, let alone black male humanity. But as a father, I'm always looking for something to, engage my son with or my students. And, I enjoy finding elements of black manhood, black male humanity that I can, pull into the discussion and kind of delve into. And, I can't lie, the passing of Mr. Gary Willis that I mentioned earlier definitely played into my imagination when rethinking this scene. You know what I mean? Because, again, I couldn't help but think about his passing while I watched it over again. So just wanted to kind of suggest, because people were asking me what my thoughts were on the film to pull out and look at. You ain't got to like it. I'm not telling you Pixar is the great coming of whatever we need. No. But I am saying there are elements of black humanity that they brought in black folk to highlight and make central in the story. And again, if you watch the extras, you can see some of these figures. The name of the gentleman who actually does the piano playing escapes me at this moment. I should have wrote it down, but I wasn't planning to kind of go there. But I will say he was brilliant. If you watch the extra where you kind of get to see him in his own element. I love seeing black men mastering what they do. I really do. And those who are unabashed about how brilliant they are with what they know. I love it. And that's one of the things I love seeing. They really even, kind of went there in terms of when you're in the zone, whatever it is you're doing, right? And so I saw these scenes where you got to see this brother in the zone, demonstrating his skill. And even to the point where his domineering mother and somewhat domineering band leader, it was interesting. Their portrayals of black women were definitely informed by folks they interviewed because they were a little too real. But with those two characters, though, they both stood in awe, right? And that's not something I see in popular media every day. So anyway, just to kind of give that something, give you something to consider. If you've already seen it, think about it.